The day of my mother's funeral was meant to be one of mourning. But when everyone left, my stepfather locked the door and said, "Now you're going to give me the son your mother never could." That day, I understood that my mother's last breath had been to save me. Hello, my dear friends. What a blessing to be able to chat with you today. I'm Alice Teresa Williams, 73 years young, and I live in Lakeside, Montana. You know, life has its ways. When I was young, I never imagined I'd be here one day, opening my heart to so many people through a little device like this. I'm a retired psychologist, but I still counsel some folks here in the community, especially women who've gone through difficult situations. I have a special corner in my home, a cozy little room with 2 brown leather armchairs that my late husband gave me as a gift when I graduated, already at 42 years old. There, between one conversation and another, over a cup of coffee or some sweet tea, I help these people find their inner strength, just as I found mine. I started helping others by chance. After I graduated, I set up a small office downtown. At first, it was just to supplement the family income, but I soon realized that each story I heard, each tear I wiped away, was like a piece of my own story being healed. As we say here in Montana, those who warm others warm themselves in life's winter. I'm sitting here on my porch with a view of the Flathead River just down below, my birds singing in the garden, and the smell of my freshly brewed coffee beside me. From here, I can see the steeple of the church where I married my dear Thomas. May he rest in peace. I have a peaceful life now, thank God. Before I continue my story, I'd like to ask a small favor. If you're enjoying this video, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps this grandma continue sharing her stories with you. And you, my dear friends who are watching me now, tell me in the comments, from which little town are you watching? And what time of day did you find this video? Early morning with your coffee after lunch? Or perhaps at nightfall when the shadows start to creep in? I always read all the comments, and I'm so happy to know where you're from and when you take a moment out of your day to listen to this grandma's stories. Let me know, okay? Let's create a chain of kindness. Today, I'm going to tell you a difficult but necessary story. A story about how sometimes, even in the darkest moment of our lives, a light can appear. And how sometimes that light comes from the most unexpected place. I'm going to tell you about the day I lost my mother and almost lost much more than that. I was born in Riverdale, a small town in Montana, in a simple but love-filled home. My mother, Dorothy Williams, was a seamstress and embroiderer. Fairy hands, as they said in town. She made the most beautiful wedding dresses in the region, and often stayed up late, bent over those white fabrics, sewing dreams with her calloused hands. My father, Joseph, worked at the railroad station. He was a quiet man, of few words, but with kind eyes. I remember him coming home with his uniform always impeccable, smelling of locomotive smoke and bringing small surprises in his pockets. A maple candy wrapped in wax paper, a colorful ribbon for my hair, a new story to tell before bedtime. It was just the 3 of us in the small wooden house on Maple Street. My parents tried to have more children, but God wanted me to be an only child. This made me the center of attention, the apple of both their eyes. My father always said, "Alice is small in size but big in heart." And it was true, I was always tiny, but with an energy that couldn't be contained. Our routine was simple. We would wake up with the roosters crowing, still in the dark. My mother would light the wood stove, and soon the smell of fresh coffee would fill the house. My father would leave early for the station, and I would help my mother organize the fabrics and threads before going to school. In the afternoon, after classes, I would play in the yard with the other neighborhood children, Celeste, Ben, and Martha, while my mother sewed on the porch, always keeping an eye on us. We would play hide-and-seek among the trees, jump rope with pieces of sisal that my father brought from the station, and on rainy days, we would gather under the porch to play jacks with little stones we collected from the river. In winter, which was harsh in Riverdale, my mother made mulled cider for the adults and hot chocolate for us children. We would all sit around the wood stove, listening to the scary stories that Ben's father told about the headless horseman and Bigfoot. It was a happy childhood, even with little. My father liked to take me to see the trains arriving and departing from the station. I was fascinated by those iron giants, huffing and releasing steam, bringing people from distant places I didn't even know existed. "One day you'll be able to travel wherever you want, Alice," he would say, pointing to the tracks that seemed endless. But our simple happiness didn't last forever. When I was 9 years old, on a cold July morning, my father didn't come home after work. There was an accident at the station. A car derailed during a maneuver. He was in the wrong place, at the wrong time. It was all very quick, his colleagues said. He didn't suffer, they tried to console my mother. But she suffered. We suffered. The funeral was at St. Peter's Church, the same one where I had been baptized. I remember the closed casket, the fine rain that wouldn't stop falling, my mother's hands squeezing mine so tightly they hurt. But I didn't complain. I knew she needed to hold on to something to keep from falling apart right there. The following years were difficult. My mother started sewing even more, accepting any order to support us. I helped as I could, delivering the finished clothes, organizing the materials, even learning some basic embroidery stitches. Our nights became silent without my father's stories. Sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night and find my mother crying quietly over her sewing, thinking I wouldn't notice. That's when Anthony entered our lives. He showed up at our door one day, wanting to order a shirt for a wedding. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with a presence that seemed to fill our small living room. He had well-trimmed gray hair and always wore shoes polished to a shine. A cattle dealer, he traveled throughout the region. He came back several times, always with a new order for my mother. And soon, it wasn't just for the sewing that he returned. At first, he seemed kind. He brought gifts, a fine piece of fabric for my mother, a porcelain doll for me. He praised her work, said he had never seen such talented hands. For me, he brought gumdrops from the big city and told stories of his travels. But there was something in his gaze that bothered me, even at that age. When he looked at my mother, his eyes shone in a strange way, as if she were one of the cows he traded at fairs. Gradually, Anthony occupied more and more space in our lives. He started having dinner with us regularly, then spending Sundays at our house. He fixed broken things, replaced the tiles that let water in when it rained hard, painted the peeling walls. My mother smiled again, and that was good to see. But for me, something didn't seem right. It was as if a shadow had entered our house along with him. When I was 12, my mother called me for a serious conversation. Anthony had proposed to her, and she had accepted. "We're going to move to Lakeside, where he has a bigger house," she explained, her eyes shining with a hope I hadn't seen since my father was alive. "You'll have your own room, you'll go to a better school. We'll have a new chance, sweetheart." I wanted to be happy for her, but part of me felt we were betraying my father's memory. And there was that uneasiness whenever Anthony was around, something I couldn't explain, but that made my stomach tighten. However, seeing my mother's smile after so much suffering, I swallowed my fears and tried to convince myself that everything would be all right. The wedding was simple, at the town church, with just a few close friends and Anthony's relatives. Soon after, we packed our bags and moved to Lakeside. The house was indeed bigger, made of brick, with a backyard where tangerine trees grew and a small garden that my mother soon filled with daisies and geraniums. I had my own room with a window overlooking the street. I could take my books and my doll collection, including the porcelain one Anthony had given me. At first, everything seemed like a dream. Anthony was attentive to my mother, brought gifts from his trips, made plans for the future. But gradually, I began to notice changes. Small at first, almost imperceptible, like the way he criticized the seasoning of the food, or how he frowned when my mother talked to a neighbor. It was when I turned 13 that things began to get really different. And neither I nor my mother could imagine how much our life would change from then on. I remember my 13th birthday, as if it were yesterday. My mother, even with her health not very good, had prepared an orange cake with chocolate frosting, my favorite. We sang Happy Birthday, just the three of us at the kitchen table. Anthony gave me a new pair of shoes, the kind for young ladies with a small heel. "You're becoming a young lady now, Alice," he said, with a look that sent a shiver down my spine. It was around that time that I began to notice how his eyes followed me around the house. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. After all, he was married to my mother. He was like a father to me, wasn't he? But there was something in that look that made me feel dirty, as if I were doing something wrong, even when I was just reading a book or helping my mother in the kitchen. That same month, my mother began to complain of back pains. At first, we thought it was just fatigue. She spent hours bent over her sewing, even after we moved to Lakeside. Anthony said she didn't need to work so much, that his money was enough for all of us, but she insisted. "I need to feel useful," she said, and deep down, I think she liked having her own income, her independence. The pains got worse. Soon, she couldn't sit for long periods. The town doctor, Dr. Oswald, diagnosed a spine problem that would need treatment in Minneapolis. It was the first time I saw Anthony really angry. "So much money wasted," he shouted after the doctor left. My mother cried in hiding that night. Even so, we went to Minneapolis for the consultations. Anthony took us reluctantly, complaining about every cent spent. In the big hospital, with corridors that seemed endless, we discovered that the problem was more serious than we thought. It wasn't just the spine. There was something growing inside her, something bad that the doctor explained with complicated words that I, at 13, didn't fully understand. But I understood enough to know that my mother was very ill. The following months were filled with trips to and from Minneapolis. Anthony grew increasingly irritated with the expenses and the time he spent driving on the highway. At home, the atmosphere became heavy. My mother lost weight. Her beautiful face became pale, her eyes without the sparkle they once had. She tried to hide the pain, especially in front of Anthony, but I could hear her moaning softly during the night. It was during this time that Anthony began to drink more. He would come home late, smelling of whiskey and cigarettes. He would argue about anything. The house wasn't clean enough, the food was cold, she had spent too much on medicines. My mother, already too weak to defend herself, would just lower her head and accept the insults. This infuriated me, but I didn't have the courage to stand up to him either. One night, I woke up to strange noises coming from their bedroom. Anthony was shouting, saying horrible things to my mother. "What good is a woman who's good for nothing? You couldn't even give me a son. All you do is spend money on doctors." I heard the sound of something breaking, and then my mother's muffled crying. I wanted to go there, to defend her, but fear paralyzed me. I lay curled up in my bed, tears silently streaming down my face, hating myself for being such a coward. The next morning, my mother appeared with a bruise on her face. She said she had tripped in the dark. Anthony drank his coffee in silence, not looking at either of us, and left for work as if nothing had happened. As soon as he closed the door, I ran to hug my mother. "Let's get out of here," I begged. She just stroked my hair and smiled a sad smile. "It's not that simple, honey. Where would we go? With what money? He wasn't always like this. It's just a difficult phase." But it wasn't a phase. It was who he really was, without the masks he wore when he met us, and things only got worse. Alcohol became a constant presence, the arguments more frequent, the bruises on my mother harder to hide, and to my horror, Anthony's gaze on me became increasingly insistent, more disturbing. One afternoon, I came home from school and found the house strangely silent. My mother wasn't in the sewing room, nor in the kitchen. I called for her and got no response. With my heart racing, I went to their bedroom and found her lying down, paler than ever, breathing with difficulty. "Mom!" I shouted, running to her side. She slowly opened her eyes and whispered, "It's okay, honey. I just need to rest a bit." I ran to call Dr. Oswald. He came immediately, and after examining my mother, his face assumed that grave expression that doctors have when the news isn't good. We needed to take her to the hospital in Minneapolis as soon as possible. I tried to contact Anthony at the agricultural equipment store where he worked when he wasn't traveling, but they said he had gone out for lunch. In fact, I found out later he was at the bar. Dr. Oswald, seeing my desperation, offered to take us in his own car. I packed a small suitcase for my mother, and the three of us departed. During the journey, she held my hand tightly, as if trying to absorb all my young energy. "Alice," she said at one point, her voice almost a whisper. "Promise me you'll be strong, no matter what happens," I promised, without fully understanding what she meant. At the hospital, she was quickly taken inside. I stayed in the waiting room with Dr. Oswald, who tried to calm me down. Hours later, Anthony arrived, smelling of alcohol, demanding to know why we had left without telling him. The doctor explained the situation, and he seemed to calm down a bit, though his eyes revealed more irritation than concern. My mother stayed in the hospital for 2 weeks. The cancer, it was the first time I heard that terrible word, was too advanced. The doctors did what they could, but the chances were minimal. I would visit her every day after school. Anthony would take me reluctantly, grumbling about the money he was throwing down the drain. During one of these visits, my mother asked to be alone with me. She was even thinner, her eyes sunken in their sockets, but there was an urgency in her gaze that frightened me. "Alice," she whispered, holding my hand with surprising strength for someone so debilitated, "I need you to listen carefully." She then told me about Helen, Anthony's first wife. "He never told you about her, but they were married for 7 years. She left him because he wasn't a good man, Alice. I didn't know that when we got married. I only found out afterward." My mother swallowed hard, her eyes teary. "Helen lives in Star Valley now. I wrote down her phone number in my little sewing notebook, the one with the blue cover with flowers. If anything happens to me, if you need help, look for her." I didn't fully understand why she was telling me this. Why would I need to look for my stepfather's ex-wife? But I promised I would do as she asked. It was the least I could do, seeing her suffer that way. The following week, the doctors suggested we take my mother home. "There's nothing more we can do here," they said, with that professional compassion that barely disguises their helplessness. "She'll be more comfortable in her own home." The journey back was silent. My mother, sedated to endure the pain of the trip, slept in the back seat of the car, with her head on my lap. Anthony drove in silence, his expression closed. From time to time, I caught him observing me in the rearview mirror, and that look made my blood run cold. When we arrived home, Anthony helped carry my mother to the bedroom. It was one of the rare moments of kindness I witnessed in the last few months. But as soon as he laid her on the bed, he left saying he needed to take care of some business. He returned late, smelling of alcohol as usual. The days that followed were a blur of constant care, sleepless nights, and a sadness that seemed endless. My mother withered with each day, and I watched helplessly. Dr. Oswald would come regularly, adjust the medication for the pain, and teach me how to take better care of her. School became secondary. I would only go when some neighbor could stay with my mother. It was on one of those mornings, when I returned from the bakery with fresh bread, that I noticed something different. The house was too quiet. I ran to my mother's room and found her, so serene, so pale, so still. "Mom?" I called, my voice trembling. There was no response. I touched her face, and it was cold. Her chest no longer moved with the effort to breathe. She had passed during those few minutes when I was out. I collapsed beside the bed, crying as I had never cried before. I cried until my eyes burned, until my throat hurt, until I felt there were no more tears to shed. That's how Anthony found me when he came home hours later. He looked at my mother's body, then at me, and didn't say a word. He just picked up the phone and called Dr. Oswald. What happened next would be the beginning of the biggest nightmare of my life. A nightmare I couldn't have imagined, even in my darkest dreams. The hours after my mother's death passed like a bad dream. Dr. Oswald came, examined the body, and signed the death certificate. He gently squeezed my shoulder and whispered, "Be strong, girl. Your mother is no longer suffering." Anthony remained distant, resolving practical matters with a coldness that frightened me. I didn't see a single tear in his eyes. The wake was organized in the chapel of the main church of Lakeside, the same church where years before my mother had married Anthony, full of hope for a better future. Now her body rested in a simple casket, surrounded by few flowers. We didn't have many friends in town. My mother's illness had isolated us even more in the last few years. Some neighbors appeared, murmuring words of comfort that couldn't penetrate the barrier of my pain. I sat on a bench in the first row, observing my mother's serene face. She finally seemed at peace, free from the suffering that had consumed her for so long. Anthony received the few present with that forced dignity, accepting condolences as if he were the only one suffering a loss. In the late afternoon, as the sun began to set, people started leaving. Soon, only Anthony, myself, and the funeral home employee who would keep watch during the night remained. Anthony approached and said in a controlled voice, "I'm going home to take a shower and bring something for us to eat. Do you want to come with me, or would you prefer to stay?" I couldn't bear the thought of leaving my mother, even knowing she wasn't there anymore. Not really. "I'll stay," I replied without looking at him. He nodded and left. The funeral home employee, an elderly gentleman with kind eyes, brought me a glass of water and a more comfortable chair. "You need to rest a little," he said. "Your mother wouldn't want to see you like this, withering away." The hours passed slowly. I prayed, cried, remembered the happy moments with my mother, when she taught me to embroider, when she sang softly while cooking, when she told me stories before bed. At some point, exhausted by the weight of the grief, I fell asleep in the chair. I woke up startled with Anthony's hand on my shoulder. "Let's go home," he said. "The burial will be early tomorrow. You need to rest in a real bed." I looked one last time at the casket where my mother rested and reluctantly followed Anthony to the car. The night was cold, typical of Montana's winter, and the star-covered sky seemed indifferent to my pain. The journey home was made in silence. I was immersed in my thoughts, in my grief. Anthony drove concentratedly, his knuckles white from gripping the steering wheel so tightly. When we arrived, I noticed something strange. He had stopped to buy more alcohol. Several bottles of whiskey were on the back seat. We entered the house that now seemed too big, too empty without my mother's presence. Even sick, she had been the heart of that place. Now, only an oppressive emptiness remained. "I'm going to take a shower and sleep," I said, heading towards the corridor that led to my room. "Wait." Anthony's voice sounded different, with an intonation I had never heard before. "We need to talk." I turned reluctantly. He was standing in the middle of the living room, an already opened bottle in his hand. His eyes had a strange gleam, almost feverish. "About what?" I asked, a chill running down my spine. "About what happens now. About us." That word, us, came out of his mouth with a terrible weight. There was no us. There was him, my stepfather, and me, the daughter of the woman who had just died. "There's nothing to talk about," I replied, my voice firmer than I felt inside. "I'm tired, and tomorrow we have the burial." I turned my back and began to walk towards my room, but I heard his heavy steps behind me. Before I could react, I felt his hand grabbing my arm forcefully, turning me to face him. "You're not going anywhere until you listen to me," he growled, his breath heavy with alcohol hitting me full on. Fear paralyzed me. I had never seen that expression on his face before, a mixture of anger, desire, and something more disturbing that I couldn't name. "Your mother is gone," he continued, still holding my arm tightly. "She never gave me the son I wanted. Now it's your duty as a daughter to give me an heir. It's your duty to get pregnant by me." His words fell on me like a bucket of ice water. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was obscene, It was sick. My mother had barely gone cold in her casket, and he— "Let me go," I shouted, trying to free myself. "You're crazy. I'm your stepdaughter." He laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "So what? We don't share the same blood. And you think I haven't seen how you look at me? How you walk around the house in those clothes?" I was horrified. The clothes he referred to were simple t-shirts and pants, nothing provocative. But in his distorted mind, in his sick desire, anything served as an excuse. "We're going to the bedroom now," he ordered, starting to drag me down the corridor. I fought with all the strength I had, scratching, pushing, trying to get loose. "No! Help! Someone help me!" I shouted, even knowing there was no one nearby to hear. He pushed me against the wall, his body pressing against mine, immobilizing me. "Nobody's going to hear you, Alice. Now it's just the two of us in this house. And you're going to do what I tell you." At that moment, I thought all was lost. I closed my eyes, tears streaming down my face, praying that it was just a nightmare from which I would wake up to find my mother alive, to return to our simple life in Riverdale before everything went wrong. That's when something unexpected happened. Strong knocks on the front door. They weren't polite knocks from neighbors or friends. They were decisive, authoritative blows. Anthony froze. For an instant, I saw something I had never seen in his eyes. Fear. "Who the hell?" he muttered, loosening his grip on my arm. I took advantage of the distraction to free myself and run away from him. The knocks continued, getting stronger and stronger. "Anthony, open this door right now!" A strong, determined female voice echoed from outside. His face paled. He looked like he had seen a ghost. "It can't be," he whispered. More knocking, stronger. "Anthony, I know you're in there. Open up or we'll break down the door." He looked at me, then at the door, undecided. Finally, staggering a bit from the alcohol and the surprise, he went to the entrance and opened it. Outside was a tall, middle-aged woman with a bearing that commanded respect. Her dark hair with gray strands was pulled back in a severe bun, and her eyes, the same hazel tone as mine, sparkled with anger. Behind her, two large, strong men with serious expressions formed a kind of guard. "Helen," Anthony said, his voice suddenly weak. "What are you doing here?" Helen, the first wife. The woman my mother had talked about in her last days. I had never seen her before, but I recognized the name immediately. She didn't respond to Anthony. Instead, her penetrating eyes found mine, quickly assessing my state, the disheveled hair, the red marks on my arms where he had grabbed me, the tears on my face. "You must be Alice," she said, her voice softer now, almost gentle. "Your mother called me 2 days ago, dear. She knew she was leaving. And she knew exactly the monster she was married to. She made me promise that, as soon as I heard the news of her death, I would come get you." My mother, my brave mother. Even on her deathbed, she had thought of me. She had plotted my salvation. I felt new tears, this time of gratitude mixed with the pain of loss. "You have no right to enter my house like this," Anthony said, trying to regain some authority. "Alice is my stepdaughter. She's under my guardianship now." Helen laughed, a cold sound cutting like steel. "Under your guardianship? The same way I was? The same way her mother was?" She took a step forward, confronting him without fear. "You think I don't know what happened to your other wives? To the other girls you tried to guard?" The two men behind her, who I later discovered were her brothers, also advanced, clearly ready to intervene if necessary. Anthony backed away, his bravado diminishing in the face of Helen's imposing presence and her companions. "This is none of your business," he muttered. "It is my business now," she responded firmly. Then she turned to me again. "Alice, get your things. Just the essentials. You're coming with us." I hesitated for a moment, looking from Helen to Anthony. I didn't know this woman, but my mother had trusted her, and anything would be better than staying there with him. "She's not going anywhere!" Anthony shouted, advancing towards me. That was his mistake. Helen's brothers moved with surprising speed for such large men. In seconds, they were between Anthony and me, blocking his path. "Touch her again, and it'll be the last thing you do," one of them said, his voice low and threatening. Anthony looked at the three, assessing his chances. Even drunk, he realized they were against him. "This won't end here," he growled. "She's underage. The police will come after you for kidnapping." Helen smiled, a cold smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Then call them. Tell them how you tried to abuse your stepdaughter on the day of her mother's wake. I'm sure they'll be very interested." His face turned red with anger, but he didn't say anything else. "Alice," Helen called softly. "Go get your things, dear. We're waiting." I ran to my room, trembling with relief and fear. I grabbed a backpack and put in some clothes, the portrait of my mother that was on the bedside table, and some mementos I couldn't leave behind. Before leaving, I remembered my mother's little blue sewing notebook. I ran to the small room where she worked and found it, hidden among the fabrics. The notebook where she had written Helen's contact information. When I returned to the living room, Anthony was sitting on the sofa, his head in his hands. Helen and her brothers were standing, vigilant. Without saying a word, I went to Helen. "I'm ready," I said, my voice trembling slightly. She nodded and put a protective arm around my shoulders. "Let's go then." We left together into the cold night. A car was parked in front of the house. Helen guided me to the back seat and sat beside me while her brothers occupied the front seats. "Where are we going?" I asked, as the car began to move away from the only house I had known in recent years. "To my house in Star Valley for now," Helen replied. "Tomorrow, we'll go to your mother's burial. Afterward, we'll decide what to do. You're safe now, Alice. That's what matters." I looked through the rear window at the house that was getting smaller in the distance. Inside was the man who had almost destroyed my life. And somewhere, perhaps watching over me from another plane, was my mother, who even in her last moments had found a way to protect me. That night, I cried myself to sleep, for the mother I had lost and for the life that had almost been taken from me. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't crying out of fear. Helen's house in Star Valley was small but cozy, very different from the cold, impersonal mansion that Anthony maintained in Lakeside. Sitting at the kitchen table, with a cup of chamomile tea in my hands, I watched Helen preparing an improvised bed for me on the living room sofa. Her brothers Gerald and Tobias had already said goodbye, promising to return the next morning to take us to the burial. "Why did you come to get me?" I finally asked, breaking the silence. "You don't even know me." Helen stopped what she was doing and sat across from me. Her eyes, although tired, had a gentleness that reminded me of my mother. "I've known your mother for longer than you imagine, Alice," she replied. "Not personally at first. But I began to keep track of her from afar when I learned that Anthony had married again." She ran her hand through her gray hair, a gesture that denoted fatigue and painful memories. "I was his first wife, as you probably already know. 7 years of hell. When I finally managed to escape, I swore to myself that I would do everything possible to prevent him from destroying other women." "How did you manage to escape?" I asked, realizing there were many similarities between our stories. "My brothers," she answered with a small smile. "They always suspected Anthony, but I was too blind to see. When I finally told them what was happening, well, they came to get me, just as we did with you today." My stomach turned at the memory of what had happened hours before. Anthony, his hands grabbing me, his disgusting words. If Helen and her brothers hadn't arrived. "How did you know my mother had passed away?" I asked, trying to push those thoughts away. "Dorothy called me 2 days ago," Helen explained, confirming what she had already mentioned at Anthony's house. "She knew she didn't have much time. She told me about the illness, about how Anthony had changed, about the looks he was giving you." She paused, as if choosing her words. Your mother was a much stronger woman than she appeared, Alice. She endured so much for you. Tears began to stream down my face. But why didn't she run away before? Why didn't she take me out of that house when she realized what he was like? Helen sighed. Fear does terrible things to us. It paralyzes us, makes us believe there's no way out. And in your mother's case, the illness complicated everything. She depended on him for the treatments, for the medicines. I nodded, understanding better now why my mother had endured so much. How did you meet her in person? After she called me the first time, a few months ago, I began to visit her when Anthony traveled. We had been planning to get you two out of there, but her health deteriorated rapidly. Helen extended her hand across the table and held mine. Her last request was that I promise to save you, Alice, and I promised. More tears. My mother, even dying, had thought of my safety. She had plotted my salvation behind the scenes, knowing she wouldn't be there to protect me. That night, lying on Helen's living room sofa with a warm blanket over me, I couldn't sleep. My mind was filled with images. My mother withering away in the hospital, Anthony cornering me against the wall, Helen appearing like a guardian angel at the door, and mainly the image of my mother's corpse, serene in the casket, not knowing that her final plan had worked perfectly. The next morning, we dressed in black and went to the lakeside cemetery. My heart was racing at the thought of seeing Anthony again, but Helen assured me that her brothers wouldn't let him get near me. The burial was simple and quick. To my surprise, Anthony didn't show up. Later, Helen told me that he was probably afraid to face her brothers again, or perhaps feared that I would tell someone what had happened. Only a few people attended: Dr. Oswald, 2 elderly neighbors, and a couple I vaguely recognized as old friends of my parents from Riverdale. I stood there, in front of the casket being lowered into the earth, feeling completely lost. What would become of me now? Where would I go? What would I do with my life? After the ceremony, when everyone had already left, I stayed a few more minutes in front of the freshly closed grave. "Thank you, Mom," I whispered. "You saved me. I promise I'll be strong, as you asked." When we returned to Helen's house, a strange feeling came over me. A mixture of relief for being away from Anthony and a profound emptiness from the loss of my mother. I sat on the small back porch, observing the well-kept yard where some chickens lazily pecked the ground. That's when I had a breakdown. All the tension, all the fear, all the pain I had been holding back exploded at once. I began to shake uncontrollably, sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. Helen came running, alarmed by my screams. "Alice, what's wrong?" she asked, kneeling beside me and hugging me. "I don't know what to do now," I managed to say between sobs. "I don't have anyone anymore. I have nowhere to go. I don't have money. I haven't finished school." Helen hugged me tighter, gently rocking me as if I were a small child. "Shh, it's okay. You have me now. You can stay here as long as you need." Those words, spoken with such conviction, were like a balm for my wounded soul. But a part of me still doubted, still feared. "Why?" I asked, pulling away to look her in the eyes. "Why would you do this for me? You barely know me." She smiled, a sad smile. "Because no one did this for me when I was your age. Because your mother asked me to, and because it's the right thing to do." She dried my tears with her thumbs. "Besides, I'm not offering charity, Alice. I'm offering a chance. A chance to start over, to build your own life away from his shadow." That night, I had a terrible nightmare. I dreamed I was back at the house in Lakeside, that Anthony had found me, that he was dragging me to the bedroom while I screamed for help. I woke up screaming, bathed in cold sweat. Helen came running from her bed and found me on the sofa, curled up like a wounded animal. "It was just a dream," she murmured, sitting beside me and holding my hand. "He can't hurt you now." But we both knew that wasn't true. Anthony was still a threat. He knew where Helen lived. He could come after me at any moment. "I need to leave," I said, my voice trembling. "Far away." to a place where he can never find me. Helen remained silent for a few moments, thoughtful. I have a sister in Minneapolis, she said finally. She has a boarding house for young women. Perhaps you could stay there for a while, resume your studies. The idea of starting over in a big city where Anthony wouldn't easily find me was tempting, but the fear was still there, deeply rooted. What if he looks for me there? What if he discovers where I am? Helen squeezed my hand. He won't. My brothers will have a serious talk with him tomorrow, and besides, you'll be surrounded by other people. You won't be alone. The next morning, while we were having breakfast, Helen presented me with a more detailed plan. Her sister, Zenobia, ran a boarding house for female students and workers in Minneapolis, near Independence Avenue. It was a safe place, well located, where I could stay while resuming my studies. "We can go tomorrow if you want," she said. "I called Zenobia last night, and she said she has a vacant room." The idea of leaving so quickly frightened me, and at the same time gave me hope. "But how will I pay? I don't have money." "Your mother left something for you," Helen said, getting up and going to a cabinet in the living room. She returned with an envelope. "She gave me this the last time we met. She said it was for you, for a fresh start." I opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside, there was a modest sum of money, probably my mother's lifetime savings, and a small gold brooch in the shape of a bird that I immediately recognized. It was a family heirloom, which my grandmother had given to my mother on the day of her marriage to my father. With it, there was a note written in my mother's delicate handwriting, already a bit shaky from the illness. "My dear Alice, if you are reading this, it's because I am no longer there to protect you. Forgive me for not being strong enough to get us out of that situation earlier. Forgive me for not being able to see you grow and become the wonderful woman I know you will be. This money isn't much, but I hope it's enough for a new beginning. And the brooch, keep it with care as a reminder that no matter where I am, I will always be watching over you. With all my love, Mom." The tears came again, but this time there was something different about them, a determination, a resolution. My mother had done everything possible to give me a chance to escape, to start over. I couldn't waste it. "I'll go to Minneapolis," I told Helen, wiping away the tears. "I'll start over. I'll study, work, build a life that would make my mother proud." Helen smiled, a smile of true happiness. "That's the right decision, Alice, and know that you won't be alone. I'll always be around, as will Zenobia and the other girls at the boarding house." That night, as I packed the small backpack with the few things I had brought from Anthony's house, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. Fear of the unknown, sadness for the loss of my mother, but also, for the first time in a long time, a small glimmer of hope. Before sleeping, I looked through Helen's living room window at the starry sky of rural Montana. Somewhere up there, I imagined, my mother would be watching over me, satisfied to know that her last and most desperate plan had worked, that I was safe, ready to start a new life away from Anthony's clutches. "Thank you," I whispered to the stars, "for everything." The next day, we would board the first bus to Minneapolis, leaving behind the nightmare that had almost destroyed my life. Ahead of me, an uncertain future, but mine. Just mine. The journey to Minneapolis was long and silent. Sitting next to Helen on the interstate bus, I watched the scenery change, the open fields of the countryside gradually giving way to the suburbs and finally to the tall buildings of the capital. Every mile that distanced us from Lakeside was like a weight being lifted from my shoulders. When we arrived at the Minneapolis bus terminal, it was already late afternoon. Helen, who knew the city well, guided us to a taxi stand. "Zenobia's boarding house is in the East Side neighborhood, near East Hennepin Avenue," she explained to the driver, who nodded and put our few bags in the trunk. The boarding house was an old but well-preserved two-story building, with a soft yellow facade and large windows. When we arrived, Zenobia was already waiting for us at the door. It was amazing how the two sisters resembled each other. The same erect posture, the same hazel eyes, the same determined expression. But while Helen had something rustic about her, a countrywoman, Zenobia had a more urban air, with her hair cut short and more modern clothes. "So this is Alice," she said, examining me with kind eyes. "Welcome, dear. Helen told me your story. You are safe here." The room assigned to me was small, but clean and cozy. A single bed, a wardrobe, a simple desk under the window that overlooked an inner courtyard where some clothes were drying on clotheslines. I would share the bathroom at the end of the corridor with 3 other young women, all students or workers. "Tomorrow, I'll introduce you to the other girls," Zenobia said as she showed me the room. "They all have their stories, their reasons for being here. We respect each other's privacy, but we also form a small family. No one is alone." Helen stayed only that night, sleeping in Zenobia's room. The next morning, before leaving, she hugged me tightly and said, "You have courage, Alice. More than you imagine. You'll do well here." Then lower, almost a whisper, "If he shows up, if you hear anything about him looking for you, let me know immediately. My brothers are keeping him under surveillance in Lakeside, but you never know." The first days at the boarding house were strange. It was as if I were floating between 2 worlds, the nightmare I had left behind, and a new reality that didn't yet seem fully mine. The other girls were kind, but I kept my distance. Fear had become so deeply rooted in me that it was difficult to trust. Zenobia, noticing my isolation, suggested that I go back to school. "You finished junior high, right? You can do high school at night school and then take the college entrance exams if you want. Meanwhile, maybe you could work part-time to help with expenses." The idea of having a purpose, of building something for myself, was like a balm. Soon, I established a routine. In the morning, I worked as an attendant at a stationery store near the boarding house. In the afternoon, I attended night school. In the evening, I studied in my small room, listening to the news of the country and the popular songs on the radio. Weeks became months, and months, years. Slowly, the open wound from my mother's death and the terror experienced with Anthony began to heal. It didn't disappear. It would never completely disappear, but it became something I could carry without it destroying me. In 1974, 4 years after my arrival in Minneapolis, I took the entrance exam for psychology. It wasn't a random choice. During those years, I had observed how many of the girls who passed through Zenobia's boarding house carried traumas similar to mine. Domestic violence, abandonment, abuse of all kinds. I wanted to better understand human suffering, not only to make sense of my own, but to perhaps one day be able to help others through their pain. To my surprise and joy, I was accepted. When I received the news, Zenobia hugged me with tears in her eyes. "Your mother would be so proud," she said. I cried too, thinking about how my mother had sacrificed everything, including her own life, to give me this chance. It was in college that I met Thomas. He was a law student, a few years older than me, with a gentle smile and eyes that seemed to see through people. We met at the Central Library when we were both looking for the same books for different assignments. What began as academic collaboration soon turned into friendship and eventually into something more. At first, I was afraid. Every time Thomas came close, every time his touch brushed my skin, my entire body would stiffen. Memories of Anthony would invade my mind. But Thomas was patient. "I'm in no hurry," he would say. "We have all the time in the world." One day, I finally told him my whole story. We were sitting on a bench in Loring Park, watching couples walking hand in hand, children running after kites. I spoke of my father's death, of my mother's marriage to Anthony, of the years of fear and tension, of the illness that consumed my mother, of the horror of that night after the wake. I spoke of Helen, of Zenobia, of the escape to Minneapolis. I spoke of everything, hiding nothing. When I finished, I was exhausted, as if I had run a marathon. I looked at Thomas, expecting to see disgust, pity, or worse, disbelief in his eyes. but all I saw was compassion and deep respect. He took my hand, gently, without any pressure, and said, "Thank you for trusting me with your story. You are the bravest person I've ever met." At that moment, something broke inside me. Not in a bad way, but like a dam that finally gives way, releasing long-held waters. I cried as I hadn't cried since my mother's death, but they were different tears, not just of pain, but also of relief, of liberation. Thomas hugged me as I cried, and for the first time I didn't feel afraid of his touch. On the contrary, I felt safe, anchored, and I knew then that despite all the scars, I was still capable of loving and being loved. Our relationship progressed slowly, respecting my timing and my fears. Thomas never pressured me, never demanded more than I could give, and gradually I relearned how to trust, to open up, to live without the constant fear that had been my companion for so many years. In 1978, when I was in my last year of college, Thomas asked me to marry him. It was something simple, without grand gestures or dramatic declarations. We were having dinner at a small Italian restaurant near the boarding house when he said, "Alice, I want to build a life with you. Will you marry me?" I said yes, without hesitation. And that same year, we got married in a simple ceremony at the courthouse with Zenobia, Helen, and some friends from the boarding house as witnesses. We didn't have much money. I was still studying, and Thomas had just graduated. But we were happy in our small rented apartment in the East Bank neighborhood. As for Anthony, I never saw him again. Helen told me, years later, that he had sold everything in Lakeside and moved to Wyoming. "It's better this way," she said, "far enough away not to worry." And that's how I freed myself from the clutches of that man who almost destroyed my life. It wasn't all at once. It wasn't in a single heroic moment. It was a slow, painful process, full of relapses and moments of despair. But step by step, with the help of people who truly cared about me, Helen, Zenobia, Thomas, I managed to rebuild my life from the ashes. And throughout it all, I felt my mother's presence. Not as a ghost, but as a gentle force guiding my steps. Her final act of love, contacting Helen, planning my escape, had given me a second chance, a chance I was determined not to waste. Today, at 73 years old, I live once again in Lakeside, the same town where I experienced the nightmare that almost destroyed my life. Returning here wasn't an easy decision. For many years, I avoided even mentioning the name of this town, as if the syllables themselves could conjure back the terror. But time has this curious power to transform places, just as it transforms people. After Thomas retired from law practice in 2015, we talked about where we would like to spend our golden years. We had lived in Minneapolis for more than 4 decades, built our life there, put down deep roots. But something in me yearned for a cycle that needed to be closed. "I want to go back to Lakeside," I told Thomas one night, surprising us both. "I want to face that place not as a frightened girl, but as the woman I've become." Thomas, with his usual understanding, simply squeezed my hand and said, "If that's what you want, we'll go together." Oh, and so, after almost half a century, I returned to the town that had been the stage for the darkest chapter of my story. But this time, I returned by choice, not by obligation. I returned as a retired psychologist, not as a helpless orphan. I returned with Thomas by my side, a man who taught me that not all male touches carry violence. Our house is in the new part of town, far from the house where I lived with my mother and Anthony. It's a modest but comfortable house with a porch from where I can see the Flathead River winding in the distance. I have my special corner where I still receive some women for therapeutic conversations. I don't charge for these sessions. They're my way of giving back all the help I received throughout my life. Helen visited us a few times before passing away in 2018 at 92 years old, a strong woman until the end. Zenobia, unfortunately, left us earlier, in 2011. Both were fundamental pillars in my story of overcoming, and not a day goes by that I don't thank them for finding me. Thomas and I didn't have children, a conscious choice we made together. The traumas of the past left deep marks, and I felt that my contribution to the world would be better through my profession, helping others overcome their own pain. Instead of biological children, we have dozens of young people who passed through our lives. Interns I guided at the university, clients who became friends, nieces and nephews we treat as if they were our own. The routine of our days is peaceful. I wake up early, prepare some coffee, and sit on the porch to watch the sunrise. Thomas, who has always been a sleepyhead, joins me later, bringing fresh bread from the bakery on the corner. We talk about the small things in life, read the newspapers, plan the day. 3 times a week, I receive women in my therapeutic corner, many of them victims of domestic violence, referred by the Women's Reference Center in town. I don't do formal therapy, my professional license is inactive, but I offer an attentive ear and guidance based not only on the books I studied, but on the life I lived. "You really understand what I'm going through," a young woman once told me, surprised by the accuracy with which I had captured her feelings. I didn't tell her my story, I rarely do, but just smiled and said, "Pain has a universal language, my dear. Those who have spoken this language recognize its dialects." On weekends, Thomas and I walk around town. Lakeside has changed a lot since the 70s. It has grown, modernized, become more open and vibrant. Sometimes we pass by the old house where I lived with my mother and Anthony. It has been renovated and painted blue, now home to a young family. I see children playing in the same yard where my mother used to plant her daisies, and I feel a strange peace. Places don't carry evil. It's the people who inhabit them that determine their energy. Once a month, I go to the cemetery to visit my mother's grave. I bring daisies, her favorite flowers, and talk to her silently, telling her about my life, about the women I've been helping, about the town that is now a place of healing, not pain. I feel that she hears me and is happy to see that her final sacrifice was not in vain. Life has taught me that the scars we carry don't completely disappear, but we can choose to transform them into a source of strength and wisdom. Each woman I help find her voice, escape an abusive relationship, rebuild her self-esteem, is a tribute to my mother and to all the women who helped me rebuild my own life. And when I look back at that terrible night after my mother's wake, I don't just see the horror that almost swallowed me, but also the miracle that saved me, the final act of love from a mother who, even knowing she wouldn't be there to protect me, found a way to ensure my safety. This is the message I carry with me and share with all who come to me seeking comfort. Hope can be born even in the most unlikely places, and sometimes it's precisely our deepest wounds that enable us to help others heal theirs. You know, my dear ones, after all these years, I've learned that the greatest power we have is not to forget the past, but to transform it into something that makes sense, that has purpose. Each scar we carry can become a bridge to reach someone who is still on the other side of pain, lost, and without hope. If you're going through a dark moment now, if you feel the walls are closing in around you, I want you to know, you are not alone, and more importantly, you don't need to face this alone. Help can come from the most unexpected places, as it came for me through Helen, the ex-wife of the man who almost destroyed my life. One of the most precious lessons I've learned is that we should always seek help. Shame wants to keep us isolated, wants to convince us that we're the only ones, that no one will believe us, that no one will understand. But that's a lie. There are good people in this world, people who extend a hand without asking for anything in return, people who believe in us when we don't even believe in ourselves. Another lesson I carry with me is that time truly is a great ally. Not that it heals all wounds, some are too deep to completely close, but it gives us the necessary distance to look at our traumas not as paralyzed victims, but as survivors in motion. And perhaps the most important of all lessons, violence is never the victim's fault. Never. No matter what they say, no matter how they try to distort reality, no one deserves to be abused, humiliated, or violated. And no one, Absolutely no one has the right to use their power or position to hurt another person. Today, when I receive these women in my home, when I see in their eyes the same fear that once inhabited mine, I tell them what I wish someone had told me when I was young. Your story doesn't end here. This painful chapter doesn't define who you are or who you can become. And you deserve a life free from fear, a life where you can breathe deeply, sleep in peace, and dream without nightmares. God knows it wasn't an easy path to get here. There were days when I woke up screaming, nights when the nightmare seemed so real that Thomas had to hold me for hours until I stopped trembling. There were moments when guilt consumed me, guilt for having survived when my mother didn't, guilt for not having been strong enough to face him before, guilt for feeling that somehow I had attracted that evil to my life. But guilt, like fear, loses its power when brought to light. When we share our stories, when we allow others to walk with us in our pain, something miraculous happens. We realize that we're not broken beyond repair. We're just in the process of rebuilding. And you, my dear ones, who have listened to me until here, perhaps because you saw something of your own story in mine, perhaps because you know someone who is experiencing something similar, or perhaps simply because your heart opened to this grandma here, I want to ask something very important. If this story touched your heart, if these words lit some light within you, please subscribe to the channel and hit the bell now. Don't wait another minute. Each subscription is a way of saying, I'm listening. These stories matter. These voices need to be amplified. And we need to create a support network, a community where these stories can circulate, touching other lives, saving other hearts. And leave me a comment with the word liberation. I want to know who stayed with me until the end, who embraced this entire journey. Your comments are like a virtual hug that I receive with gratitude. I end with the same phrase I use when saying goodbye to the women I counsel. Life is not always fair, but we are stronger than we imagine, and together we are invincible. God bless you, my dear ones. Until next time. My own brother would throw me on the bed and scream, I'm going all out until you pass out. He was the city champion, but at home, I was his punching bag, until the day I grabbed the scissors and destroyed what he loved most. Hello, my dears. How are you all doing? I hope you're well, healthy, and surrounded by lots of love. My name is Martha Louise Sanders. I'm 71 years young, and today I'm here in my simple little house in Hickory Creek, Tennessee, the same small town where I was born and raised. You know Hickory Creek is famous for its beautiful countryside and friendly folks, right? But today I want to share with you a very different story, one I've carried in my heart for over 50 years. I'm sitting here in my living room, in my favorite armchair, the one my late husband, God rest his soul, bought at a clearance sale in the neighboring town about 20 years ago. It's a bit worn, but it's been my companion every afternoon. Next to me is my little side table with the embroidery I'm making for my granddaughter, Isabella. You know, my dears, I discovered embroidery later in life, after I turned 60, when I moved back here. It happened like this. When I returned to Hickory Creek after decades living away, I felt a bit lost, you know? The neighbors were different, houses had changed, even the town square looked different. Then a neighbor, Mrs. Geraldine, God bless her, saw me looking sad on the porch and came over to talk. She brought some fabric, colorful threads, and said, Martha, come learn something with me. And that's how I discovered my hands had a knack for this art. Today I embroider tablecloths, dish towels, pillowcases. It's therapy, you know? Each stitch I make is like a prayer, a good thought coming from the heart. The house here is small, 2 bedrooms, a living room, kitchen, and a little bathroom. But I have a nice porch where I put some plastic chairs and planted some flowers. I have begonias, violets, and some herb pots, basil, mint, chamomile. In the early morning, when the sun is still cool, I'm out there watering and talking to them. My children, I have 3, all married with their own lives, always say, Mom, you talk to the plants. And I answer, well, who says they don't listen? Now, before I continue my story, I'd like to make a special request to those of you watching. Tell me here in the comments, from which little town are you watching me? And at what time of day did you find this video? Early morning with your coffee, after a warm lunch, or in the late afternoon when the sun is setting? I always read all the comments with great affection, and I'm so happy to know where you're from, and when you take a little time out of your day to listen to this grandma's stories. Tell me, okay? Let's create a chain of caring from corner to corner of this great country of ours. And if you can, click that like button down there and subscribe to Grandparents' Tales channel. This helps this grandma a lot to continue telling these stories I carry in my heart. Each new subscription is like a hug I receive from you. Well, now I'm going to tell you a story I've never really told anyone, not even my own children. It's a story that hurts, but needs to be told. A story about how my own brother almost broke me, but in the end taught me that sometimes you have to fight in a way nobody expects. It's about the time when I was just a scared little girl, living in fear inside my own home because of someone who should have protected me. I was born right here in Hickory Creek on March 15, 1954, in a small wooden house on Elm Street. Nowadays, that street doesn't even exist anymore. They built new constructions there. It was a simple house, one of those old Southern homes with 3 small rooms, my parents' bedroom, another little room that I shared with my brother Bobby when we were small, and the living room that also served as a dining area. The bathroom was way in the back of the yard, and to take a bath we used a big aluminum tub that my mother heated water for on the wood stove. My father's name was William Sanders. Everyone knew him as Bill, and he worked at the railroad depot in Hickory Creek. Back then, the trains still came through regularly, bringing tourists to our beautiful countryside. Dad was a short man, thin, a man of few words, but hard-working like nobody else. He'd leave at dawn, when it was still dark, and only return late afternoon, always with that smell of rust and machine oil stuck to his clothes. My mother was Elizabeth Ann, but everyone called her Betty. She was the opposite of Dad, talkative, laughed loudly, and knew everyone in town. She worked doing alterations from home, fixed clothes, made dresses for girls who were getting married, embroidered trousseau linens. Her sewing machine made noise all day long, and I loved sitting on the floor next to her, watching those colorful threads turn into flowers and beautiful designs on fabrics. Bobby, Robert William Sanders, was 3 years older than me. When I was about 5, he was already 8 and everyone's favorite. Oh, my dears, how handsome that boy was. Light brown hair, wavy green eyes that came from Mom's side of the family, and even at that age he was strong, full of energy. Dad always said proudly, "This boy is going somewhere in life, you'll see." And Mom would get all silly. My beautiful Bobby, my little champion. Our routine was quite simple, as was customary for humble families in the South back then. We'd wake up early, before the rooster crowed. I'd help Mom light the fire in the wood stove, fetch water, our house didn't have running water, and prepare breakfast, black coffee, homemade biscuits that she made every week, sometimes cheese we bought from Mr. Anderson's farm. After Dad left for work and we had breakfast, Bobby and I would go to school. The little schoolhouse was about 4 blocks from home, and we'd walk, me always running behind him who walked fast. Bobby was always popular at school. The boys wanted to be his friend because he was strong and brave, and the teachers liked him because he was smart and got good grades. I, on the other hand, was always quieter, a bit shy. I liked staying in my corner, drawing or playing with the rag dolls that Mom made for me from fabric scraps. I had a favorite doll, Rosie, made from pink flowered fabric with yellow yarn hair. I took her everywhere, talked to her, told her all my secrets. Afternoons were free for play. Bobby was always in the middle of the neighborhood kids, organizing baseball games, flying kites, inventing competitions. I preferred staying close to home, playing house with the neighbor girls, Teresa, Mrs. Josephine's daughter from next door, and Marlene, who lived 3 houses down. But already at that age, when I was about 6, 7 years old, I started noticing strange things about my brother. He'd always been bigger and stronger than other children, but he started getting kind of, how can I explain, too aggressive in games. When he played ball, he always wanted to win, and if he lost, he'd get really angry, not that normal childish tantrum. It was an ugly anger that left the other boys kind of scared. And with me, he started having weird games. I remember once, I must have been about 7, he called me into the room and said he was going to teach me Indian wrestling. He knocked me down on the bed and kept holding me tight by my arms, heavy on top of me, while I asked him to stop because it was hurting. He'd laugh and say, "Don't stop, weakling. You have to learn to defend yourself." When I finally got out from under him, I was all bruised on my arms, but when I showed Mom, she just said, "Oh, honey, it's sibling play. Your brother doesn't mean any harm." It was always like that. Anything I complained about, Bobby, Mom, and Dad defended him. "It's just playing. He's teaching you to be strong. That's what siblings do." And Bobby kept noticing he could do whatever he wanted to me, and nobody would scold him. Another day that really marked me was when I was playing in the backyard with my Rosie. Bobby came and snatched the doll from my hand, saying he was going to test if she was resistant. He started pulling, stretching, and suddenly, crack, he ripped off her poor head. The yarn that was her hair got scattered all over the floor, and I started crying desperately. It was my favorite doll. He just laughed and threw the pieces on the ground. She wasn't resistant after all, just like you. When Mom saw the damage, I expected her to scold him. But no. She just said, "Oh, Bobby, why did you do that to your sister's little doll?" And he, with that angel face he knew how to make so well, answered, "Sorry, Mom, it was an accident. I was just playing." And she, "Okay, son, go play with something else." I never got another doll like her. Mom said she didn't have money to buy new fabric just for that I could play with the other smaller dolls I had. But it was never the same. And so went my childhood here in Hickory Creek. The good memories mixed with these strange moments that, at the time, I didn't quite understand. I just knew that my brother, who everyone admired, who was handsome, intelligent, and strong, sometimes did things to me that scared me. But back then, children didn't question adults, and if Mom and Dad said it was normal, then it must be normal, right? At least, that's what I tried to believe, as I grew up in that little house on Elm Street, not knowing that the worst was yet to come. When I turned 13 in March 1967, things started changing in a way I could never have imagined. Bobby was already 16, and my God, how that boy had grown. He was becoming a real man, tall, broad, with muscles that seemed to grow from one week to the next. His hair was still beautiful, wavy, light brown, which he kept long to almost his shoulders, as was fashionable at that time. The girls in town sighed when he walked down the street. It was that year that Bobby discovered wrestling. A man called Coach Oswald had arrived in Hickory Creek from Nashville, who set up a kind of gym in a rented garage near the railroad depot. He taught wrestling, that wrestling we saw on Mrs. Ziegler's television. She had one of the few TVs in the neighborhood and let the kids watch on Saturday afternoons. When Bobby saw those big men grappling in the ring, applying moves with strange names, he was mesmerized. He came home that day saying he was going to be a wrestler, that he was going to be champion, that he was going to make lots of money and become famous. Dad and Mom got excited. Imagine their son becoming a real wrestler, just like the ones on TV. "My son will be the pride of Hickory Creek," Mom would tell the neighbors. And Dad, who was always a man of few words, smiled proudly and said, "This boy has the strength of a bull. He was born for this." Coach Oswald accepted Bobby as a student, and that was it. From then on, my brother lived at that gym. He'd leave school and go straight there, only return home at nightfall, all sweaty, smelling like a man, with those muscles getting bigger and bigger. He started eating like crazy. Mom cooked food that seemed to be for a family of 10 just to keep up with his appetite. Eggs, meat, milk, bananas, everything he said he needed to gain muscle mass. And along with the muscles, His arrogant attitude also grew. Bobby had always been kind of a bully, but now it was impossible. He thought he was the owner of the truth, the strongest in Hickory Creek, the future champion. He talked about beating up anyone who disrespected him or the family. Our parents were proud of this champion's personality, but the worst was with me. The games he had with me when we were little turned into something more serious, more frightening. Now he said I was going to be his practice dummy at home. "I need to practice the moves," he'd say, "and you're going to help me, little sis." The first time he really did this to me was on an April afternoon. I remember like it was yesterday. I was in the bedroom, lying on my little bed, reading a book from school. It was Charlotte's Web, which I loved. Mom had gone out shopping, and Dad hadn't returned from work yet. The house was empty, just me and him. Bobby entered the room as if he owned the place. He was only wearing shorts, all sweaty from training, with those huge muscles looking like they were going to explode. Hair stuck to his forehead from so much sweat, but still handsome, shiny. "Get up, Martha," he said, with that voice that was already getting deep like a man's. "I'm going to practice some moves." I sat on the bed, holding the book against my chest. "Practice how, Bobby? Go practice at the gym." He gave a laugh that gave me chills. "The gym closed early today, and I need to practice some holds. You're going to help me." "I don't want to," I said, trying to get off the bed. But he was faster. He grabbed me by the arm and threw me back on the bed with a force that left me dizzy. "I didn't ask if you wanted to," he said, climbing on top of me. "Coach Oswald said that a real wrestler has to train every day, even at home. And you're going to stay quiet right there." And that's how the hell of my life began. He threw himself on top of me with all that weight. And people, how heavy he was. He must have weighed about 150 pounds of pure muscle crushing my skinny 13-year-old body. I felt like a cement bag had fallen on top of me. "This move is called total immobilization," he explained, as if it were a class, while pinning me down with his arms and legs. "The opponent can't move or breathe properly." And it was true. I couldn't breathe. His weight was crushing my chest, and I started to panic, thrashing like a bird trapped in a cage. "Stop, Bobby! I can't breathe!" But he just laughed. "That's how it's supposed to be. Coach Oswald said the move is only right when the other person runs out of air. Hang in there, weakling." I hit his arms, his back, trying to push, but it was like trying to move a mountain. He was much bigger, much heavier, much stronger, and the more I struggled, the more he seemed to enjoy it. "Don't resist, Martha. Stay still, and it'll pass." And he increased the weight even more, crushing my little body until I started seeing bright spots in front of my eyes. When he finally got off me, I spent a few minutes unable to speak, just gasping, trying to get air back into my lungs. My ribs hurt, my back hurt, and I felt like I'd been run over by a car. "Done," he said, all satisfied, as if he'd done a good job. "The move worked perfectly. You almost passed out, right? That's how it should be." When Mom came home from shopping, she found me still kind of dizzy, sitting on the edge of the bed. "What's that face, honey? Are you feeling sick?" "Bobby, I started to say, but Bobby appeared in the bedroom doorway, all smiles. "Martha helped me practice some moves, Mom," he said, with that angel face he knew how to make so well. "She's a really cool sister, helps me train when I can't go to the gym." And Mom, instead of asking if I was okay, was proud. "Oh, how wonderful, honey. You should support your brother. He's going to be a famous wrestler, and you can say you helped him train." I looked at her face, then at his face, and understood it was no use saying anything. Nobody would believe me. Or worse, they'd believe and think it was right. And that's how that terrible routine began. Every time Bobby came home and nobody was around, he'd call me for training, always with the same excuse, that he needed to practice moves, that I was helping him become a better champion, that it was for his own good. But I knew it wasn't. I saw in his eyes something bad, a strange satisfaction when he saw me struggling to breathe under all that weight. It was like he enjoyed seeing me small, weak, powerless, And the worst part is that everyone in Hickory Creek was starting to talk about Bobby as the town's future champion. People would stop Mom in the street to praise her son, to say how strong and handsome he was getting. "What a blessed boy you have, Mrs. Betty. He's going to be successful in life." If they only knew what that blessed boy did to me inside the house, when nobody was watching. But back then, children didn't talk about certain things to adults, and I didn't even know how to explain what was happening. I only knew I was scared, very scared of my own brother, and that fear was growing along with him. After that first time in April, the training sessions became routine in my life. Bobby had discovered he could do whatever he wanted with me and still be praised for it. "How nice that your sister helps you train, son," Mom would always say. And he'd smile, satisfied, knowing he'd found the perfect excuse. Coach Oswald's gym was becoming successful in Hickory Creek. Every weekend there were demonstrations at the town square with students showing off moves to the crowd. Bobby became the star of those demonstrations, the youngest, the most handsome, the strongest. People would clap, shout his name, "Go, Bobby, show them, champ." And the more famous he became out there, the more terrible he became with me at home. It was like he needed to take out all that pressure of being Hickory Creek's golden boy on someone, and that someone was me. The training sessions started happening almost every day. He'd come home from the gym, all sweaty and agitated, and look for me around the house. "Martha, come here, I learned a new move today." It was always with that fake excitement, as if he was going to teach me something good. But when we got to the bedroom, always my bedroom, because it was smaller and only had my single bed, his face changed completely. He became a person I didn't know. His eyes would get different, kind of glazed, and a strange smile would appear on his face. "This move I learned today is called thoracic pressure," he explained to me one May afternoon while pushing me onto the bed. Coach Oswald said it's one of the most effective to leave the opponent without reaction. I already knew what was coming. My 13-year-old body started trembling just seeing him approach. "Bobby, not today. I have a headache." "A headache has nothing to do with wrestling training," he said, already climbing on the bed. "Stop being fussy and stay quiet there." His weight had increased even more. Coach Oswald was making him eat protein, take vitamins, do specific exercises to gain muscle mass. He must have been about 165 pounds by then, maybe 175, all solid muscle, heavy. And me? I was a skinny girl of about 90 pounds soaking wet. When he threw himself on top of me, I felt like the whole world was collapsing on my chest. The bed creaked, sank under the weight of both of us, but especially his. He positioned himself in a way that all that weight concentrated on my chest, on my lungs. "The secret," he'd say, as if giving a lesson, "is to distribute the weight just right so the person can't expand their chest. Like this." And he'd press even more, leaving me breathless. I'd thrash, try to push, but it was like an ant trying to move a rock. He'd just laugh at my desperate struggle. "That's it, struggle. That's what a real opponent will do too. The more you struggle, the better I train." My ribs started hurting constantly. I'd wake up in the morning with pain, go to sleep with pain. When I breathed deeply, I felt a sharp sting on the left side. Mom asked once, "Why are you always holding your chest, honey?" And I, as always, didn't know how to explain. "Oh, must be gas," I made up. But the worst wasn't even the physical pain. It was the humiliation. Bobby started saying horrible things while immobilizing me. "You're so weak, Martha," he'd whisper close to my ear with that hot, sweaty breath. "So tiny. Like a little bird that fell from the nest." And when I started turning purple from not being able to breathe, when the bright spots appeared in my vision and I felt I was going to faint, he'd get excited. "There, the move worked. Look, you're almost passing out. Coach Oswald would be proud." There was one time, at the end of June, when he went so far that I actually passed out. When I woke up, I was alone in the room, dizzy, with a taste of blood in my mouth. I'd bitten my tongue. Bobby wasn't there anymore. I heard him in the living room talking to Mom as if nothing had happened. "Oh, Mom, Martha was helping me with some exercises here, but she got tired and went to rest." I started having terrible nightmares. I'd dream I was being crushed by a mountain, that I couldn't breathe, that I was screaming for help, but nobody heard. I'd wake up in the middle of the night gasping, sweaty, looking at his room to make sure he wasn't there. And during the day, I lived in fear. Fear of being alone at home, fear of hearing him arrive from the gym, fear even of the sound of his footsteps on the wooden floor of our house. When I heard thump, 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 the heavy sound of his boots, my heart would race. I tried talking to Mom a few times, but without really knowing how to explain. "Mom, I don't like the training Bobby does with me." But she'd always cut me off. "Oh, honey, that's silly. Your brother is teaching you to be strong. It's for your own protection. And besides, you have to help him achieve his dream of becoming champion." And Dad? Dad was prouder of Bobby than ever. Every night when he came home from work, he wanted to hear news from the gym. "So, champ, how was training today?" And Bobby, all smiles, would tell about the new moves he'd learned, the competitions Coach Oswald was organizing. "In September, there's going to be a championship in Knoxville," Bobby announced in one of those conversations. "Coach Oswald said I have real chances of winning. I'm going to represent Hickory Creek." The whole town got excited about the news. The mayor said he'd give Bobby a stipend to go compete. The church had a raffle to raise money for transportation and lodging. Everyone said, "Our boy is going to put Hickory Creek on the map." And the more famous he became, the more intense the training sessions with me became. It was like he was saving all his aggression to unload on me. "I need to train harder," he'd say. "The competition is coming and I can't mess up." I started making up excuses not to be alone with him. I'd say I was going to Teresa's house, that I had homework to do, that Mom had asked me to help with something. But there always came a time when he'd corner me. "You've been avoiding me, little sis," he said one afternoon, blocking the bedroom door when I tried to pass. "That's no way to help your brother. Don't you want me to win the competition?" It was always like that. He'd turn my resistance into a betrayal of the family, disloyalty to his dream. And since I was just a 13-year-old girl, without knowledge, without support, I'd always end up giving in. Around that time, I'd lost weight, was even skinnier. I couldn't eat properly. My stomach was always upset with anxiety. Mom even commented, "This girl is too skinny. Could she have worms?" But it didn't go beyond that. The family's attention was all focused on Bobby and his training. One August afternoon, when there were only a few weeks left until the competition, he came home more agitated than usual. "Martha, come here quick." His voice had a different urgency, more intense. When we got to the room, he was sweating more than usual, his eyes shining in a strange way. "Today I learned the most powerful move of all," he said, with that terrible smile. "It's called Complete Finisher. Coach Oswald said only the most experienced wrestlers can apply it properly." I swallowed hard, trying to back away, but he'd already closed the door. "Bobby, not today. I'm feeling sick." "The opponent is the one who's going to feel sick when I apply this move on him," he said, advancing toward me. "Come here. You're going to help me perfect it. It's for the competition." And that day, for the first time, I had the real certainty that my brother could kill me. The weight, the pressure, the duration, everything was more intense. And in his eyes, I saw something that terrified me. He was enjoying not just seeing me without air, but seeing me afraid of dying. It was like he'd discovered a terrible power over me and was testing how far he could go. And I knew, deep in my scared little girl's heart, that if I didn't do something soon, one day he'd go too far, and I wouldn't be able to wake up after the bright spots disappeared from my sight. The last week of August 1967 was when everything reached its limit. Bobby was in terrible anxiety because of the approaching competition. There were only 10 days left until the championship in Knoxville. Coach Oswald was pressuring him to train more, to get stronger, to perfect the moves. And all that pressure fell on me. I need to train every day now, he'd say, with those eyes shining in a way that gave me chills. I can't miss a single day of practice. You're going to help me, right, little sis? That week, the training sessions became daily torture. Every single day when he came home from the gym, he'd come straight looking for me. It didn't matter if I was doing homework, helping Mom, or simply trying to exist in peace. He'd always show up with that terrible smile. Training time. Monday arrived like a warning from hell of what was to come. Bobby showed up at the school gate when I got out of classes, something he never did. Let's go, Martha. Today is a special training day. The tone in his voice was different, more serious, more frightening. I can't, Bobby. I promised Mom I was going to help her with... I started making up an excuse. Mom already knows you're going to help me. He cut me off, taking my backpack and throwing it on his shoulder. I already explained to her that I need intensive training this week. She was even proud. How wonderful that your sister supports you like this, son. And he imitated Mom's voice in a way that made me angry and sad at the same time. On the way home, he explained what he called the final preparation schedule. Coach Oswald said that in the week before an important competition, the wrestler has to simulate real combat situations every day. And you're going to be my official training partner. Training partner. As if I had a choice. As if I wasn't just an object in his hands. When we got home, Mom was in the kitchen preparing dinner. Oh, how nice you arrived together. Bobby, son, your little sister here is a sweetheart for helping you like this with training. Not every sister does that. Bobby smiled, that fake smile he knew how to make so well. That's true, Mom. Martha is really special. She helps me a lot to improve my moves. And there I was, standing, wanting to scream that it wasn't help at all, that it was torture, that it was fear, that it was pain. But the words wouldn't come out. Because who would believe? Who would imagine that Hickory Creek's golden boy was using his sister as a punching bag? Today we're going to train resistance time, he explained to me when we got to the bedroom, closing the door as always. I'm going to apply the move, and you have to hold out as long as possible without passing out. Coach Oswald said that in a real competition, the opponent will resist a lot. I need to know how long it takes for a person to give up completely. When he said, give up completely, a chill in my stomach told me this wasn't going to be like the other days. There was something different in his eyes, a cruel determination I'd never seen before. Bobby, I started to protest, but he was already climbing on the bed. No, I don't, Martha. Today is serious. I'm going to time it properly. And he showed the watch Dad had given him as a birthday present. Let's see how long you last before passing out. His weight that day was even more crushing. He must have gained more muscle, more density. When he threw himself on top of me, I felt like a truck had run over my chest. The bed groaned, sank, and I felt like I was being swallowed by the mattress. Timer on, he announced, as if he were a sports coach. Let's see your real resistance. And the pressure began. But it wasn't like the other times. He was being scientific, methodical. He'd apply the weight, wait for me to start struggling, relieve it a little so I wouldn't pass out, then increase again. It was like he was testing exactly where my limit was. 30 seconds, you're turning purple. 45 seconds. Oh, look, you started shaking. 1 minute. The little eyes are rolling back. He narrated my agony as if it were a scientific experiment. And the most terrible thing, I could hear in his voice that he was enjoying it. It wasn't just training. It was pleasure. Pleasure in seeing me struggling to breathe, to not die. 1 minute 20. Interesting. You're lasting longer than last week. You must be getting more resistant. When he finally got off me, I spent about 5 minutes coughing, trying to get air back into my lungs that felt like crumpled paper. He wrote something in a little notebook. Excellent. You held out for 1 minute and 37 seconds before starting to pass out. You're improving. And he smiled with genuine pride, as if I'd done something impressive. 1 minute and 37 seconds without being able to breathe properly. 1 minute and 37 seconds, feeling like I was going to die. For him, it was just training statistics, data to improve performance. Tuesday was when he decided to test move variations. Coach Oswald said that a complete wrestler has to master the move in all possible positions, he explained, dragging me to the room again. Today we're going to do the complete test. You on your back, on your side, on your stomach, half sitting, all angles. Each position was a different kind of agony, a new form of terror. On my back, I saw the ceiling spinning as his weight crushed my chest, and I could see his face above me. Those glazed eyes, mouth half open in concentration, an expression that wasn't my brother's. It was a dangerous stranger's. On my side, I felt my ribs being pressed against the mattress as if they were going to break. The weight concentrated differently, pressed the organs, made a kind of pain I'd never felt before. It was like being crushed from the inside. But on my stomach was the worst. With my face buried in the pillow and all that weight on my back, I could barely breathe even when he eased up a bit. The pillow got wet from my tears, and sometimes I felt like I really was going to suffocate, that I was going to die right there, with my face stuffed in the old cotton pillowcase. This position here is deadly, he said, satisfied, turning me on my stomach for the 4th time. The opponent can't even scream for help. It's perfect for finishing a fight quickly. And it was true. With my face in the pillow and all that weight on my back, I couldn't even moan. It was like being buried alive, like being already dead but still feeling everything. I'm going to write down the time for each position, he said, always with that little notebook. On your back, 1 minute 40. On your side, 50 seconds. On your stomach, 2 minutes 10. This is the best. When he finally stopped, I was shaking like a leaf. Not just from lack of air, but from real terror. For the first time, I looked at my brother and thought in so many words, he can really kill me and still say it was a training accident. His face when he looked at me during these tests wasn't a brother's face. It wasn't the face of someone who loved me, who cared about me. It was the face of someone studying an object, seeing how far they could go without breaking it completely. Wednesday was the day that changed everything. Mom left early to spend the day at my aunt's house in the next county. Aunt Zelda had gotten sick, and Mom went to help take care of her. Dad had taken an extra shift at work to earn a little extra money for Bobby at the competition. It was just me and Bobby at home, the entire day. How lucky, he said at breakfast, with that smile that made me want to vomit. Today we're going to have all day to train properly. I'm going to simulate a complete competition. It'll be like a real competition, with several rounds, intervals, everything proper. My God, how long that day was. The living room clock never moved so slowly. He made me his opponent from 8:30 in the morning until almost 5 in the afternoon, stopping only for us to eat something quick and go to the bathroom. Round 1, warm-up, he'd announce, as if he were a radio announcer. Round 2, basic moves. Round 3, advanced holds. And so it went, inventing excuses to use me as a rag doll all morning, all afternoon. Between one round and another, he'd drink water, eat something, stretch. And me? I'd lie there half dead, trying to catch my breath to endure the next one. This here is really professional training, he'd say, all proud. Coach Oswald would be impressed if he saw my level of dedication. In the noon round, something in my head started to break. It wasn't just my body being destroyed. It was something inside my soul, my will to live. I was there, under that weight, and for the first time I thought, maybe it would be better if I really died. Maybe it would be better to stop suffering. And it was at that moment that he said something that woke me from the trance of despair. You know, Martha, you're getting good at this. You barely struggle anymore. You're learning to accept the move, not to waste energy resisting." And he gave that little laugh I hated. Who knows, maybe one day you'll become a wrestler too. Of course in women's wrestling, right? It would be fun to wrestle against you for real in a ring. It would be interesting to see how far you can go before breaking completely. The coldness in his voice, the way he talked about hurting me as if it were fun, as if it were an interesting experiment. At that moment, even with my mind kind of clouded from lack of air, I had a crystal clear certainty. My brother was no longer my brother. He was a monster using my body to satisfy something sick, something rotten that had grown inside him. And worse, he was enjoying not just hurting me, but seeing me lose the will to resist. It was like he wanted to break me completely, turn me into a doll that didn't even react anymore. In the final round of the afternoon, he said, it was almost 5 o'clock. I'm going to apply my secret move, the one I created myself, based on everything I learned. I'm going to call it the Tennessee Finisher. It'll be my secret weapon in the competition. The secret move was the most terrible thing he'd ever done to me. He pinned me in a way that concentrated all the weight on my lungs, but at the same time trapped my arms and legs in a way that I couldn't even move to try to resist. It was a total, complete immobilization. The beauty of this move, he explained while I felt life fleeing from me, is that the opponent is completely defenseless. Can't move, can't breathe, can't do anything. Just wait for consciousness to go away. And that's exactly what happened. I felt my consciousness drifting away, like I was floating away from my own body. I saw everything from above, my skinny little body under that enormous weight, my purple face, my eyes rolled back. And I thought, with a strange calm, this is how I'm going to die. At 13 years old, in my own bedroom, by my own brother. When I woke up, I was alone in the room. The house was silent. I looked at the clock. It was almost 6 in the afternoon. I'd been unconscious for over an hour. Bobby hadn't even stayed to see if I was alive. He simply finished the training and went to do something else. I got up slowly, dizzy, with a taste of blood in my mouth. I'd bitten my tongue, and the pillow was stained with a mixture of blood and saliva. My ribs hurt so much I could barely breathe properly. And when I looked at myself in the small mirror on the wall, I almost didn't recognize myself. I was too thin, with deep dark circles, lips still kind of purple, neck with red marks. I didn't look like a 13-year-old girl. I looked like a ghost, a shadow of what I was before. That's when I heard Bobby in the living room, talking on the phone with someone, probably Coach Oswald. I trained all day today, Coach. Tested my new move several times. I'm confident for the competition. Oh, my sister? She's great, helped me a lot. She's a very good training partner, never complains. Never complains, because I couldn't complain, because nobody would believe, because I was just a scared girl in a family that only saw the champion son. Thursday was when I tried, for the last time, to avoid being alone with him. I spent the whole day at Teresa's house, made up that I had to help Mrs. Josephine with a deep cleaning, organizing closets, anything that justified me not coming home until nightfall. Teresa's house was small and simple like ours, but it was a refuge. There I could breathe properly, laugh at the silly things she said, play with dolls without fear. For a few hours, I could forget there was a monster waiting for me at home. You've been kind of strange, Martha, Teresa commented while we played in her backyard. Quieter, sadder. Did something happen? For a moment, I thought about telling her everything. But how to explain? How to say that my own brother, the town's pride, was using me as a practice dummy? How to say he enjoyed seeing me almost dying? It's just, my brother has been very nervous because of the competition, was all I could say. And when he gets nervous, he gets more angry. Oh, I see, she said, not understanding the gravity. Older brothers are like that, right? Mine also gets unbearable when he's worried about something. If she only knew what kind of unbearable my brother was. When I got home at nightfall, Bobby was waiting for me on the porch, sitting in Dad's rocking chair. In the dark, with that big, still figure, he looked like a threatening statue. "Where were you all day?" he asked, with that low voice that meant danger. "At Teresa's house, helping Mrs. Josephine," I answered, trying to go straight inside the house. But he got up and grabbed me by the arm, hard. His hand was so big it closed almost entirely around my skinny little arm. "You're avoiding me, Martha." It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. "That's no way to treat your brother. Especially now, with only 5 days until the most important competition of my life." "Bobby, You were just running away from your duties as a sister," he cut me off, pulling me toward the hallway. "You promised to help me train. You promised to support me. And now you're running away like a spoiled child?" "I didn't promise anything," I murmured, more to myself than to him. But he heard, and his face changed completely. It got dark, dangerous, as if I'd said the worst possible offense. "Didn't promise?" he repeated, with that low, threatening voice. "So you don't want me to win the competition? You don't want me to bring pride to the family? You don't want Dad and Mom to be proud?" And there, in that dark hallway, with him holding me too tight, I understood there was no way out. Any resistance from me was transformed into betrayal of the family, into selfishness, into lack of support for his dream. "You're going to help me train now," he said, pushing me toward my room, "and it's going to be heavy training to make up for the lost day. So you learn not to abandon me when I need you most." And it was. It was the heaviest, most violent, cruelest training up to that point. He was nervous, anxious, and took it all out on me. He applied move after move, turning me from one side to another on the bed as if I were a sandbag he could punch and kick at will. "The competition is going to be tough," he'd mutter while pinning me down for the 5th time in a row. "There are guys from Memphis, from Nashville, from all over Tennessee, all more experienced than me with more training time. I need to be perfect. I need my moves to be lethal." And the more nervous he got talking about the competition, the more violent the training became. At one point, he pinned me so hard I felt something crack on the left side of my chest. The pain was so strong, so sharp, that I screamed, a muffled scream because I could barely breathe, but that came from the depths of my soul. "Quiet!" he hissed, covering my mouth with his big, sweaty hand. His hand tasted of salt and sweat, a bitter taste that made me nauseous. "You want to wake up the whole neighborhood? What are you going to say, that I'm hurting you? Who's going to believe that? Everyone knows you helped me train. Everyone knows you're the most supportive sister in the world." And there, with his hand covering my mouth, with that weight crushing my chest, with the rib, or whatever it was, throbbing with pain, I had a clear, crystalline vision of my future. Either I did something to stop this in the next few days, or one day he was really going to kill me. It wouldn't be out of malice. It would be an accident, carelessness, from being too focused on training. And everyone would say, "What a tragedy. The girl who wanted so much to help her brother become champion. What a terrible training accident." And Bobby? Bobby would pretend he was devastated, would cry at the funeral, would tell everyone how I was a special sister, how I died doing what I loved, helping him achieve his dream. And it would even become a beautiful story, a local legend. The girl who died supporting her wrestler brother. When he finally got off me that night, I lay for a long time in the dark, feeling the pain in my chest, listening to him brush his teeth in the bathroom, listening to him go to his room and lie down. And that's when I started really planning. It wasn't just a scared child's fantasy anymore. It was a real, concrete, desperate plan. I lay there, in the darkness of my room, listening to him snore in the next room, thinking about what I could do. I couldn't confront him with strength. He had 3 times my weight and was trained to fight. I couldn't tell my parents. I'd already tried and they never believed. I couldn't run away from home. It was 1967. 13-year-old girls didn't go around alone, and besides, where would I go? How would I live? But there was one thing I could do. One thing that would hit him where it hurt most, that would destroy what he loved most about himself. One thing that would show him I wasn't just a defenseless doll he could break at will. The hair. Always the hair. Every day, religiously, after his shower, Bobby would spend about 20 minutes in the bathroom combing, putting on brilliantine, arranging every strand of that golden mane. He had several combs, different types of pomade, even a special brush he'd asked Dad to buy in Knoxville. "My hair is my trademark," he'd always say, admiring his reflection in the small bathroom mirror. "It's what sets me apart from other wrestlers. When I enter the ring, everyone will remember the Tennessee Lion because of the hair." Tennessee Lion. That's what he wanted to be known as, because of the golden wavy mane that bounced when he moved in the gym's ring. "A wrestler needs to have personality," he'd explain to anyone who wanted to listen. "Needs to have a strong image. And my image is this, the young lion of muscles and golden mane." He loved that hair more than he loved any person, more than he loved the family, more than he respected his own sister's life. That hair was his identity, his self-esteem, his source of power, and that's exactly why it was going to be his downfall. I lay there, planning every detail. Mom's sewing scissors were stored in the Singer machine drawer in the living room. They were good scissors, sharp, that she used to cut thick fabrics. They'd serve perfectly. The best time would be at dawn, when his sleep was deepest. Bobby always slept like a rock after intensive training, his body exhausted, relaxed, confident he was safe in his own home. The competition was the coming Saturday. Today was Thursday. Friday would be my last chance, because after that, he'd travel to Knoxville, and if he came back from there as champion, he'd be unbearable for good. And if he came back defeated, he'd take out his frustration on me in a way I might not survive. It was now or never. Friday night, going into Saturday, at dawn. And it was going to be the hair, that beautiful, vain hair that he loved more than anything in the world, including more than his own sister's life. And when he woke up bald, when he saw in the mirror the destruction of his trademark, when he understood he couldn't go to the competition anymore because he'd be a laughingstock, then he'd know what it was like to feel small, defenseless, humiliated. He'd know what it was like to have something precious destroyed by someone who should protect you. Friday night, August 29th, 1967, was the longest night of my life. Lying in my little bed, I listened to every sound in the house. The living room clock going tick-tock, the wind shaking the roof tiles, Dad snoring softly in his and Mom's room, and especially Bobby's heavy breathing in the next room. All that day, he'd been even more agitated. The competition was the next day. Saturday morning, he was going to travel to Knoxville with Coach Oswald and 2 other students from the gym. The whole town was talking about it, everyone wishing luck to our champion. "Tomorrow is the big day, little sis," he'd told me at dinner time, with that smile I knew all too well. "After I win this competition, I'll be able to train even more seriously. Who knows, maybe I'll open my own gym here in Hickory Creek, right?" The idea of him having his own gym, where he could train as many girls as he wanted, gave me a chill down my spine that almost made me give up everything. Almost. But then I remembered the still painful rib, the marks on my neck, how I'd been unconscious for over an hour on Wednesday. And I knew I couldn't let him come back victorious from that competition. Couldn't let him become even more powerful, even more untouchable. I waited until almost midnight. Dad and Mom had been asleep for a long time. Bobby had gone to bed early, saying he needed to rest well to be in shape. I heard him in the bathroom doing his usual ritual, brushing his teeth, combing his hair, putting on the special pomade that made the locks shiny. "Tomorrow everyone will see the Tennessee Lion in action," he'd murmured to the mirror, thinking nobody was listening. "They'll see why this hair is my trademark." When I finally heard him snoring, that heavy snore of someone exhausted from training, I slowly got up from bed. My bare feet made no sound on the cold wooden floor. I'd memorized every creaky board, every place to step without making noise. First stop, the living room, to get Mom's scissors. The Singer sewing machine was there, imposing, in the corner near the window. In the bottom drawer, along with the threads and buttons, were the big scissors Mom used to cut thick fabric. When I grabbed the scissors, my hands were shaking so much I almost dropped them. They were heavy, cold, and the blades gleamed in the faint light coming through the window. For a moment, I just stood there, looking at the object that was going to change everything. "You can do this, Martha," I whispered to myself. "You have to do this." I went back to the hallway, walking like a ghost. His bedroom door was ajar. Bobby always slept like that because he said he needed air circulating. I stood in front of the door, listening to the regular snoring, trying to gather courage. I pushed the door slowly, inch by inch. It creaked softly, but he didn't wake up. The room was dark, but the streetlight coming through the window was enough for me to see his figure on the bed. My God, how big he was. Even sleeping, even relaxed, that body took up almost the entire bed. One arm thrown out, legs stretched, breathing making his chest rise and fall heavily. And the hair. Oh my God, the hair. Spread on the pillow like a golden halo, each strand shining in the dim light. It really was beautiful, wavy, silky, the kind that made girls sigh when he walked down the street. But I didn't feel anything anymore seeing that beauty. I only felt anger. Anger at how he used that appearance to fool everyone, to be seen as an angel while he tortured me in secret. I approached the bed, holding the scissors with both hands so they wouldn't shake so much. He was sleeping on his side, face turned to the wall, leaving the nape and sides of his hair well exposed. I took a deep breath and positioned the scissors at the base of the hair, very close to the neck. The first lock I cut was thick, heavy. The sound of the scissors cutting was louder than I expected, a crack that seemed to echo throughout the entire room. Bobby moved, mumbled something incomprehensible, but didn't wake up. My heart was beating so hard I felt it in my throat, but I continued. Lock by lock, I cut everything. It wasn't a careful cut, it wasn't meant to look good. It was meant to destroy. I'd cut very short in some places, leave uneven tufts in others. In some spots, I cut almost to the scalp. As I cut, a strange sensation took over me. It wasn't just revenge, it was power. For the first time in a long time, I was in control. I was doing something important, something that was going to change everything. The locks fell on the pillow, on the floor, on my nightgown. Golden hair everywhere, as if I'd killed an animal with beautiful fur. And in a way, that's exactly what I was doing, killing the Tennessee lion. When I finished with the hair on his head, I looked at those thick, well-shaped eyebrows that completed his masculine beauty. Why stop at just the hair, I thought. And I cut the eyebrows too, leaving only weird, uneven tufts that gave a bizarre aspect to his face. The result was devastating. The head that before had a beautiful mane now looked like a sick person's, someone who'd been through some tragedy. Tufts sticking out to one side and the other, huge gaps where the pink scalp showed, strange marks where I'd cut too deep. I gathered as much cut hair as I could and took it to the kitchen. I lit the fire in the wood stove and threw it all in there. The smell of burning hair rose through the chimney, a strong kind of sweet smell that stuck in my nostrils. I washed the scissors in the sink and put them back in the sewing machine drawer. I went back to my room and pretended I was sleeping, but actually I just lay there, waiting for the moment when he was going to wake up. It must have been about 6 in the morning when I heard him moving. First were the normal sounds of someone waking up. Yawn, stretch, feet touching the floor. Then I heard him walking to the bathroom, and then, "Ah!" His scream echoed through the entire house, a cry of despair and horror that even woke up the neighbors. It was a scream that didn't sound human. It sounded like a wounded animal, betrayed, destroyed. My hair, who did this to me? I heard him running through the hallway, banging on doors, screaming like crazy. "What's happening, boy?" Dad shouted, still half asleep. But when they saw Bobby there in the hallway, with that bizarre head, with those weird tufts sticking out everywhere, even they were speechless. My son," Mom stammered, bringing her hand to her mouth. "What? How?" "Someone cut my hair," he screamed, with tears running down his face. "Someone came into my room and destroyed everything, destroyed my life." That's when I pretended to wake up, coming out of my room rubbing my eyes as if all that noise had woken me from sleep. "What's happening?" I asked, with the most innocent voice I could make. When Bobby saw me, his eyes filled with murderous fury. "It was you!" he screamed, advancing toward me. "It could only have been you! But Dad grabbed him by the arm. "Calm down, boy. It couldn't have been your sister. Look at her size. How could she do that without you waking up?" And it was true. I was so small, so skinny, that it really seemed impossible for me to have done that. The very size difference between us worked in my favor now. But, Bobby stuttered, looking from me to our parents, trying to process what had happened. "But how? Must have been some burglar," Mom said, still in shock. "Someone who came in at night, who I don't know, wanted to humiliate you before the competition." "The competition!" he shouted, as if only at that moment had he remembered. "I can't go to the competition like this. Everyone will laugh at me. I'll be a laughingstock." And he collapsed, literally collapsed. That big man of almost 175 pounds threw himself on the hallway floor and started crying like a little child. Loud sobs, desperate, of someone who'd lost the most important thing in their life. "My hair, my trademark, my Tennessee lion," he whimpered, running his hands over his destroyed head. "How am I going to compete like this? How am I going to show up in town like this?" Dad tried to console him. "Son, hair grows. In a few months you—" "A few months!" Bobby screamed. "I lost the only opportunity of my life. The competition is today. Coach Oswald is waiting for me, and I'm going to show up there like what? Like a clown?" And the more he cried, the more I felt a strange satisfaction growing inside me. Finally he was feeling small, humiliated, destroyed. Just like he made me feel every day. "I'm not going," he said suddenly with a defeated voice. "I'm not going to the competition. I can't show up like this in front of everyone." Mom tried to argue. "But son, you trained so hard. You can't give up because of—" "Because of!" he exploded. "Because of what? Look at me. Look at what they did to me." And really, seeing him there, with that bizarre head, those ridiculous eyebrows, it was impossible to imagine him in a ring. He who'd always been so vain, so concerned with appearance. How was he going to bear being seen like that by hundreds of people? At 8 in the morning, when Coach Oswald arrived to pick him up, Bobby didn't even want to leave the room. Dad had to go to the door to explain that there was an accident and that Bobby couldn't participate in the competition. "What kind of accident?" the coach asked, worried. "It's complicated to explain," Dad stammered, "but the boy can't compete today. I apologize for all the inconvenience." The coach left upset, taking only the other 2 students, and all of Hickory Creek found out that same day that the future champion hadn't shown up at the competition. Speculation ran wild, that he'd gotten sick, that he'd gotten injured in training, that he'd gotten scared. But nobody knew the real truth, that the Tennessee lion had been sheared by his own little sister. Bobby spent the whole day locked in his room, refusing to eat, to talk to anyone. Every now and then, I'd hear him crying softly, as if he were in mourning. And me? I spent the most peaceful day I'd had in months. For the first time in a long time, I could walk around the house without fear. For the first time, he was more fragile than me. But I knew that couldn't last. I knew that at some point his anger would overcome his sadness, and then I was going to pay dearly for having done that. very dearly. That's why, when night fell that Saturday, I pulled Mom aside and whispered, "Mom, can I go spend a few days at Aunt Zelda's house to help take care of her since she's sick?" Mom, who was still kind of in shock from everything that had happened, agreed without even thinking much. "Of course, honey. It's actually good for you to get away for a bit. Your brother is very shaken. He'll need a few days to recover." Sunday morning early, Dad took me to the station and put me on the bus to the next county. When the bus started moving away from Hickory Creek, I looked through the little window and saw my hometown getting smaller, disappearing in the distance. I didn't know yet, but that was the last time I'd see Hickory Creek as my home. From that day on, a new life was going to begin, far from the monster who'd disguised himself as a brother for so long. And when the bus finally disappeared around a curve and Hickory Creek completely vanished, I smiled. I smiled for real, for the first time in months. The Tennessee lion was dead, and I was free. And here I am today, my dears, at 71 years old, back in my Hickory Creek hometown after almost 40 years living in the next county with my Aunt Zelda. Life took many turns until I got to this simple little house where you find me today. I lived with Aunt Zelda until she passed away in 1995. They were good years of healing, where I learned that not every adult in the family hurts you. She took me in, made me study, taught me to sew properly. It was there I met my Jack, a good man, a railroad worker who respected me from day one. We married in 1973 when I was 19. Jack knew my story. I told him everything before the wedding. And he said something I never forgot. "Martha, the past doesn't define who you are today. You're the bravest woman I know." We had 3 beautiful children, Charles, Regina, and Anthony. I raised them with lots of love, but always alert, always protecting. I never let anyone hurt my babies the way I was hurt. Jack passed away 5 years ago from heart problems. I miss him every day, but I'm not sad. He gave me a family, gave me love, showed me that a real man protects, doesn't hurt. I returned to Hickory Creek in 2020 because I missed my hometown. The house where I grew up doesn't exist anymore. They built an apartment building in its place. Bobby. I never saw him again after that day. I heard he left town shortly after I did, went to try his luck in Memphis. They say he never came back. Today, my joy is my grandchildren. Isabella, Charles's daughter, is 8 years old and is my sweetheart. Every Friday she comes to sleep over with me, and I teach her to embroider, tell stories, make that cornbread she loves. My children live nearby, all married, all happy. Charles works at City Hall, Regina is a teacher at the public school, and Anthony has a mechanic shop. They take good care of this grandma here. Afternoons are my favorite. I sit on the porch with my embroidery, watch the street activity, chat with neighbors. Mrs. Geraldine, who taught me to embroider, still lives 2 houses down, even at 85. In the morning, I wake up early, water my plants, make a nice cup of coffee, and sit here in the living room, listening to my little radio. Sometimes a grandchild comes to do homework with me, sometimes neighbors stop by to chat. It's a simple life, but it's mine. A life I conquered after so much struggle. I don't have wealth, but I have peace. I have a family that loves me. I have my little house. I have my freedom. And most importantly, I have the certainty that that scared 13-year-old girl grew up and became a strong woman who raised good children and who never again let anyone take away her right to be happy. My dears, if you're going through a situation similar to what I went through, I want you to know something. You're stronger than you think. I was just a skinny 13-year-old girl, and I managed to free myself from my tormentor. You can too. I learned that sometimes we don't need physical strength to overcome who hurts us. Sometimes we need courage to hit what matters most to the person. In my brother's case, it was his vanity. Everyone has a weak point, and when we discover what it is, we can turn the tables. I discovered that whoever hurts us inside the home counts on one thing: our silence. They know it's difficult to report someone from your own family, but there's always a way out. There's always someone willing to help. In my case, it was my Aunt Zelda. I understood that time heals, but only when we distance ourselves from whoever makes us suffer. It's no use staying close waiting for the person to change. Sometimes you need to have the courage to start over far away, even with fear. Today, I know that no matter how long you suffered, you can rebuild your life. I did it. I got married, had beautiful children, created a family full of love. The trauma didn't define who I became. If someone in your family or someone close is hurting you, seek help from authorities, organizations that protect people in situations of violence. Anywhere in the world, there are people willing to help. Don't suffer alone. And remember, my dears, whoever really loves doesn't hurt. Whoever protects doesn't attack. Don't accept excuses from those who use you as an outlet for their problems. The revenge I took wasn't the ideal solution, but it was what a desperate girl could do at that time. Today, there are other paths, other ways to seek help and protection. But if you've made it this far with me in this story, I want to make a special request. Subscribe to Grandparents' Tales channel and turn on notifications right now. This story needs to reach those who are suffering in silence, needs to show that there's always a way out. Share with someone you know needs to hear this. And you who watched until the end, comment only the word courage down below. That way, I know you understood the message and that you're with me in this chain of strength and protection. My dears, life can be difficult, but it's always, always worth fighting for better days. I'm living proof of that. Do this now, don't wait another minute. A hug from this grandma who learned that being small doesn't mean being weak.